Welcome to my paint along video of these bison. This is a fun little watercolor sketch to give you an intro to the wonders of watercolor. So, as we get started, I am laying in some yellow ochre and blended with some burnt sienna in the background of his mane. There's so much texture in the fur of these bison, and watercolor is a good way to emphasize that. There's more burnt sienna and actually even some red and blue that can be mixed in with just that first layer that we're glazing in. In watercolor, we do several layers of very light washes, and this is called glazing. The first layer goes on very wet, and this gives the laying out these colors a chance to just blend in to each other. And so we want to do this pretty lightly, not a lot of pigment, more water than pigment. So any place on this bison that I see that's in shadow, I like to start with just a layer of blue. Blue is always going to be part of the shadow, so I just start with the blue. And then I'll come back over that in the next layers of glazing after that's dry. So this part is dry now, so I'm coming back over it in the next pass with some burnt sienna. There's a lot of burnt sienna in this painting. And just follow the directions of those lines as you lay that paint in. More burnt sienna in the lighter part where the sun is casting. Burnt sienna is pretty warm. You can cool it down with ultramarine blue, but it's a warm color on its own. Now I'm looking for the shapes of the fur and going around that to just establish where those shapes are with some darker blues. These bison are such majestic little beasts, big beasts, not little. They're really fun to go see in Yellowstone. There's more burnt sienna, just shaping the part of the fur around his face. And as you're dropping in that color, remember to keep the direction of the lines that you want. And I'm going around the eye. Making sure that eye doesn't get touched too much because it needs to stay really light. More line work as that dries. There's usually 2 or 3 passes of glazing. I would say up to even 8 layers at times, depending on the detail that you want. Now this dark color is going around that fur in the front of his face. I want that nose to kind of stand out, so I'm keeping that pretty white. To get that good dark, I've mixed ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and some of that red together. That's a good dark. This part is more of a dry brush, and so use the tip of that paintbrush to make good lines. There's not a lot of water on your brush at this point. You might want to even wipe it off on a tissue to get a good tip. Okay, now this part that is above the horns, I dropped in some water up there. I'm just going to go in some dark right up against that so it has a fused look, and it's a wet into wet approach so that it blends at the edges. I like to leave some holes as I'm painting. Don't just fill in every little tiny bit. As you know, the white in watercolor is the paper. So leave a little bit of sparkly holes here and there. You can always go over them if you need to. Now here's the next pass after this is dry. More of that dark stringy hair. The horns are pretty important, so you want them to stand out, so having dark behind it makes that pop out, and the blues give it some shiny texture to it. Not texture, but it's kind of a shiny look. Same thing as the nose. You want to have those blues in the nose. That helps it to be shiny. Now I'm coming back over with burnt sienna and giving some more texture to this fur. The dark against that fur really makes that stand out. Every layer that you put in there gives more dimension, more detail. You don't want to overdo the detail, but the detail is important in the center of interest. A little bit more line work. That eye on the right is quite a bit in shadow, so you don't see a lot of the eye, but leave a little bit of highlights there. One more pass over the line work on the left. More of that rich burnt sienna mixed with a little bit of red. I like to do these sketches before I do a big full-scale painting, just to get to know the painting, get the lights and darks in there, and that's really what this is a sketch. But it gives you the idea of how to handle watercolor. The lights and darks, what's bringing that forward, the intensity. Just more texture. So much texture in there, in that fur. And I'm going over it and over it. And sometimes I even take the brush with a wet brush and disturb it a little bit and lift out some of the colors. You do that by wetting your brush, then drying it, and then disturbing the paint with the end of your brush to lift it out, and then wiping off your brush so that you don't bring pigment back into it. There's our little guy in the background. So there's a couple of bisons in this painting, but one is a little insignificant than the other, but it also tells a story. What's that bison doing? He's in the foreground and one's in the background. So the background, there's very, very little detail, only just a tiny little shape. And the background of the field and even the atmosphere of the background is just wet into wet with some yellow ochre and burnt sienna, but way more water than pigment. And so I'm letting a little bit of that the fur color blend in with the background to give it some placement in the painting and dimension. Now I'm going back over and touching things up a little bit, getting a little bit more detail here and there as it needs. Maybe softening some edges here and there, just disturbing some of the color that looks like there's too many hard edges. You can do lots more detail. You can keep working at this. But this is kind of the sketchy part of it. And then you can do a bigger painting later if you want to. Wild animals are great to paint. Keep painting. Have fun.